My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I think I have a very interesting show. It may bother a few people, but that's the world we live in. People get offended by everything these days. So what I want to talk about today is society is now creating children who actually bully themselves. Now in psychology, we call this digital self-harm. We'll get to the definition in just a little bit. But first, how does this even start? Well, it starts off because we live in a very social media and a very digital type of world where we exalt the victim mentality and the outrage community is somehow exalted as well. So we're getting these kids now because they're being raised on social media and the digital world that it starts off with being addicted to their devices. And from there, they want to get their attention, their self-esteem, all of that based on that. Now, before we get to the definition of digital self-harm, I want to give you an example of what this is what it sounds like. Now, keep in mind, what I'm going to play for you now is a little bit disturbing for some people, so I have to say that up front. But what we're talking about here is a 15-year-old. Now, I want to say boy or a child, but let's be honest about this. Even the term teenager, there was no such term until after World War II. So we're talking about around 1945 that companies started to market specifically to this new group, and they called them teenagers. Up until then, teenagers were known as inexperienced adults. A lot was expected of them. So we can say that in certain religions, at 13 years old, you're considered to be a man or a woman. But in today's society, we look at 13, 15, 17, 18, 19-year-olds as being children these days with no responsibility and we don't care if they can manage their emotions or not. So again, I'm going to show you a 15-year-old who was having a little difficulty getting a high score in his video game, and his parents told him to take a break from the video game. That's what we're listening to. So let me get to this. Okay, we can stop that there. I'm going to bring this back a little bit here. Okay, so here we have a 15-year-old. Now, let's understand something here. Like back in the day, right? Like at 15 years old, somebody like me, I was already in my first bodybuilding magazine. At 15 years old, I had already about 7 years of competitive sports. And I'm not special. Like I was on the team with a bunch of other young men that did the same thing. And it would be normal to compete. It would be normal to put out your best effort, to try to overcome resistance, to overcome adversity and do the best you can and know that you're going to lose a lot of the time and to try to do well. What you heard there, it sounded like someone trying out to be in a death metal band. Right? Now, on one side you could say, oh, you need to have more empathy and compassion for that baby, that child. Yeah, I think so too. But to have the correct and accurate empathy and compassion, It is not to give him more leeway to scream and cry more and to say, poor baby, you know, the world's tough because you're not that good at Grand Theft Auto. I mean, think about it. You have a man and a woman, let's say, and they meet each other and they fall in love and they get married and then they want to start a family and they do have a child. And this child is born and they both look at this child and they're like, this is going to be the greatest child. I am going to do everything I can to give this child the best it can. And I want this kid to be happy and to fulfill his potential. And then you get what I just played you. A 15-year-old at that age screaming like his life is ending because he didn't do well in a video game. This is the essence of addiction that we're looking at a young age. And the fact that there's no ability to manage any emotions, that his whole identity is all wrapped up in this. And then his parent tells him, you need to take a break from the video game. And he screams. I only played you like 30 seconds. That goes on for about 30 minutes. I mean, you would think that the parents are abusing him. Well, maybe they are. Maybe they need to get rid of the video games. So to continue with the rest of the show here, because you can see where I'm trying to lead you. Now, the term digital self-harm, it means when a person, a young person, I want to say like at 15, he's a baby, but he's not a baby. Let's say someone between 12 to 17 years old, because that's where we're seeing this, they anonymously post negative and harmful content directed at themselves. So again, they're going on social media anonymously to put themselves down. You can call this cyberbullying of the self. Now, what's the prevalence on this? So I took a study from 2017, which actually means that it's getting worse, because that was 6 years ago already, but I thought the information was pretty good. So out of the Journal of Adolescent Health, now we're talking about young people between the ages of 12 to 17 years old. 35% of them said that they have participated in digital self-harm. So we have 1 out of every 3 teenagers putting themselves down. Now, if you're a little bit older, let's say you're a different generation like me, you could always remember like graffiti, like on walls or in bathroom stalls and stuff like this. And it would always be like, you know, for a good time, call this person's a jerk, this teacher sucks. Now, think about it this way. The graffiti that these kids would be putting up on walls is, I need you to know that I'm a jerk. I need you to know that I'm stupid. Like, this has hit a level that no one has ever considered it before. Now, 13% of kids between 12 and 17 admit to doing this many times on a regular basis. That should scare you. Now, victims of bullying are more likely to self-troll themselves. Now, what does this tell you? Well, what it can tell you is that because these bullying programs that I've talked about in the past already, they're teaching people not to fight back. They're teaching people to be professional victims. And if there's more victims than victors, then the victims can actually win by default by not actually producing anything or being special in any way. So if a person gets bullied, they're more likely to turn around and start bullying themselves, kind of like those fainting goats that are out there. They see a challenge and they just automatically collapse. We're creating children like this. This should be very disturbing. This digital self-harm, it's strongly correlated for later on, for substance abuse, for depression, for anxiety, for behavioral problems, for physical self-harm. And as I stated before, it's definitely correlated to device dependency and dependency on social media. Now let's start with a couple of, let's say, superficial reasons of why a young person would resort to bullying themselves anonymously, which sounds ridiculous, right? Continuing, the first one is some type of social development. That sounds weird just to say it, right? Like social development. How in the world are you going to become socially developed by criticizing yourself publicly? Well, what they want to do is that they want to try to prove which people are going to stand up for them, if they have real friends or not. Again, that's a social media problem, because if you actually had real friends, you would know who your friends are, and you don't need to put yourself down to see who's going to actually come to your rescue. Again, victims want to be rescued. We're teaching this, we need to change it. Continuing, also along the lines of social development, if you want to call it that, they're trying to prove their resilience, and they're trying to prove their mental toughness. It's hard for me to say this with a straight face. These kids are actually anonymously posting negative things about themselves, and that is a way to prove how tough they are and resilient. Again, they live in a fake world, therefore they're making up fake problems, and then their solutions are also fake. Now, back in a different time, if you wanted to prove your resilience and your mental toughness, you would play sports. You would look for academic achievement. You would be in some type of competition, not always with others, but with yourself to do better. That's the natural biological imperative. But somehow we're bleeding that out of kids. Now think about the young people who stormed the beaches of Normandy, right? Like that was a mentally tough thing to do, showed that they could overcome adversity. Definitely there's a huge amount of resilience in surviving all that. But today, kids are under the impression that posting something that says something negative about them is overcoming some type of obstacle. No, we're doing a terrible job with these kids in this society. Another reason why these kids do this is because they're looking for personal gain. Big shock, right? All living things are trying to look for some type of personal gain. They're looking for sympathy. They're looking for attention. They're looking to create their own personal entertainment. Now think about this. They're not doing anything creatively to be better. They're not working hard to get better. But they're feeding off the emotions of other people by posting fake things about themselves. Now, what do we call things in biology that feed off of others? Well, they're parasites. That's what they are. So once again, our society today is actually creating children who are parasitic. Continuing, one of the reasons why they do this is because it's an expression of their negative emotions. And where do these negative emotions come from? Well, because of being the way they're raised, again, being addicted to social media and video games and all this kind of stuff, TikTok, you name it, they don't have any self-esteem. Social rejection is also part of it, but they're not really being rejected completely because they don't really have social interactions in the first place. So they consider being rejected someone who doesn't put a like on one of their pictures, which is ridiculous. And there is a level of bullying that goes on because that goes on throughout all human beings' lives, so that's normal. But then they take it to another degree to create these intense negative emotions. Some of their negative emotions arise from the fact of that they have no interest, no human connections, and they have no mastery and no skills. If their only skill is to play a video game, then that's not a skill whatsoever. So those are some of the superficial reasons of why a kid would resort to digital self-harm or cyberbullying. Let's get to the difficult truths of why this is really the problem, or why kids would do this. the root cause. It's because they have unhealthy relationships at home, where kids are more connected, supported, and influenced by their phone than their own parents. Yes, it's hard to hear, but you know what? I do show after show on this. Nobody wants to hear it, and so not that many people care. So let's just keep going down the road. We know where the train's going. These kids are getting worse by the day, and we do know why they're getting worse by the day, but no one seems to want to do anything. So I'll keep saying it. So here's a second reason. Because these kids have unhealthy relationships at school, where kids are more influenced by their online world, which includes likes and followers and social contagions, at the expense of living a real life and having real friends. And number three, unhealthy mental health, including the inability to work hard, to manage their emotions, to persevere, to believe in themselves, and a complete aversion to having real relationships with real people. And so therefore, they make up half their problems. And I'm going to give you another reason here, but just to go back just a little bit, just to remind everybody, fake problems with fake solutions, and they're addicted to their social media, and then they learn to hate themselves, and then they go out of their way to post things to hate themselves. And once again, this is what we create. Again, no ability to manage any emotions there. Completely addicted to something that doesn't matter in any way, shape, or form. So let's go back to some basics about human beings. Every animal has a natural biological imperative to be competent, to be powerful, and to achieve some level of mastery. All living things are like this. If you see people who are not, they're people who have given up a long time ago due to probably their environment, and then they bought into it, and then they're beating themselves up. But all living things do want to have a sense of mastery. Even if being a master of being a victim, at some point, that's what it leads to. Like, that's what you just heard there. There's somebody trying to be a master at being a victim, because that sounds so horrific that the first thing those parents are going to go and do is buy them another video game. No, they're not going to do the hard work. They're going to buy them another video game. That's what's going to happen. Continuing. Humans have a natural drive to accumulate power over others. It's actually more important for most people to have power over other people than it is to have power over themselves. Now, yes, it's healthy to conquer yourself before you conquer others, but be that as it may, most powerful people are trying to overcome and overpower other people more than themselves. It's a reality. So what happens when someone judges themselves to be powerless, to be incompetent, incapable, and being totally hopeless to change it? As I showed you on there. Well, they become professional victims. And if they can't beat the crowd, they join the crowd. And if they expect the crowd is going to put them down and say bad things about them, back to the self-cyberbullying. They're going to join the crowd. They'll anonymously go on some platform and they'll start to put themselves down, because at least now they have friends and they all agree on one thing, that they suck. And we're seeing this more and more. We're looking at about 13% of 17-year-olds and under do this. That's ridiculously high. So if a person deems themselves as being basically unnecessary and being a burden, and that they're not good at anything, And by the way, the parents are at fault more than the kids because they're not pushing them to do anything. I can't tell you how many times I would try to teach a kid to play guitar and he would play one note and go, I'm not good, that didn't sound good. You're not good? Listen, it takes minimal 10,000 hours to be decent. Like, you're gonna pluck one string and say you're not good, right? You know, this is taught by the parents of as soon as a kid complains, they let them get whatever they want, and sometimes what they want is not to do anything. And now you're stuck with a teenager or an adult that is not doing anything other than playing video games. Fast forward, if the child or the young adult is completely incompetent, they have no mastery, they have no skills, they have no value to themselves or society because they haven't worked on anything, they haven't tried to reach their potential. And by the way, human beings who are not striving to reach their potential, you don't have to reach your potential, but it's the striving to reach for it. If you're not doing that, that leads to mental illness. That's very, very important to know. And the people who are not doing that, not only do they tend to have more depression, more anxiety, more suicidal ideations, and they scream their heads off like a death metal singer when they can't play a video game, they tend to end up punishing themselves. And they do this with a very critical inner voice. In other words, I'm bad, I'm terrible, I can't do anything, I'm not worth it. Right? And then they'll go on, again, social media, digital self-harm, they'll do it to themselves publicly. They don't take care of their health, they eat garbage food, they don't do any exercise, they don't care how they look or how they dress, they don't care about their mind, they're not trying to read, to be more educated, they're not trying to talk to people, ask them questions so they can learn. We used to call it picking somebody's brain, because everybody out there in this world does know something that you don't know. So that's a quick way to learn, start asking questions. These people don't do that. They allow other people to treat them poorly. If by chance somebody does treat them well, then they'll try to do something so the other person does treat them poorly, or they won't accept the love that's given to them. And they treat themselves with total disrespect. So that's the bottom line about digital self-harm, cyberbullying the self, and why it happens, and why our society at large is actually encouraging and supporting this. And then on the micro level, we have parents who are not doing the right thing. So in a sense, they are encouraging and supporting this type of behavior as well. Although no parent is outright going to say that this is a good thing. Obviously, everybody knows it's a bad thing. However, I want to know the people that are actually doing something to make it better. It's the same thing. We all know that fruit and vegetables are healthy, but how many people have a steady diet of fruit and vegetables? Most people are still going to fast food places and eating a bunch of garbage and processed food, and they know better. Well, here, we know better. I think Maya Angelou said, if we know better, we do better. It's a nice sentiment. I mean, she's a great poet, she's a great writer, but it's not true. Most people do know better, but they don't do better because they want to be more comforted. They don't want to do any of the hard work. So hopefully you found that valuable today. My name is Joe Peroni. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.